Hey everyone, welcome back. In this Selenium Java framework tutorial, we are going to write the utility to read the data from the Excel file that we have saved, right? So there is an Excel file and this is the Java class or util that we'll write that will read the data from this particular Excel sheet and display on our screen, right? So let's quickly see how we can write that utility. Okay, so the first thing is let's define a method that will basically implement all that logic. Okay, so I'll simply say public void and we'll say get data. Okay, and within this method, what I want the flexibility is I should provide where my sheet is, right? So I can just say string and Excel sheet name, right? So I can say Excel sheet name as a variable there. Now what this Excel sheet name is basically within the sheet, you remember that if I open the sheet, there is a sheet name, right? So there could be a test case related to login. So I have a sheet with login, there is another sheet, there is another sheet. So depending on the logical combination of the test cases within your project, will be having different sheets. So I want to pass the sheet name and then we should be able to read data from that sheet itself. Okay, so that's why we want this flexibility here to pass the sheet name. Okay, and then let's start defining this particular util. Okay, so the first thing that we need to do is basically from which file we want to read the data. So there is a file class, so we can create an object of the file class, right? So we can say file f is equal to new file and we need to provide the location of the file, right, to this. And where is the location? So location is within this particular folder and test data, right? So we have already understood that to get the location of this project path, there is a system variable to get the property, right? So system dot get property. Okay, so we just need to provide the string there and we need to provide within this string, we just need to say user.dir and this will give us the location up to this test automation framework in our project path, right, in our actual machine. And then we just concatenate the remaining path. So where exactly is this file? This is within the test data. So I can simply right click and click on properties. And with this system user.dir, we'll get location up to the Selenium automation framework. And then we up to test automation framework, sorry. And then we just need to append where exactly the file is. So src test resources test data. Okay, so we'll copy that much and then we'll just concatenate, right? So we'll say plus and within this quotes, we'll provide that location, right? And within this test data, what is the file we have? We have this test data dot xlsx. Okay, so this is the file that we want to read. Now you will see that this is giving error, right? So what we need to do is you just hover over, okay, and you need to basically import this java.io. Okay, so from the java.io, make sure that you are importing from java.io this file. Okay, so you will see that the error has gone, right? So now we are reading this file, Excel file. The next thing we want to do is we are doing file input stream, right? So file input stream, and this is another class and we'll create a new instance of the file input stream class as well. And in this file input stream, we need to pass the location or the reference of this file that we want to read, right? So we pass the reference f there. Okay, the next thing is we just hover over and import this file input stream from java.io as well. Okay, the next thing is we need to read the workbook, right? So we say workbook, and so after opening this file and creating the file input stream, we need to know which workbook we are trying to read. So we create an instance of the workbook as well, right? So in Excel sheet, we have the workbook. Then we have within the workbook, we have sheet, right? So first thing is file. We read the file, right? So we create an instance of the file. So this is the first line here. Second thing, we create an input stream, which creates a stream of this particular file. And then we want to go to the workbook, which is Excel workbook. And from Excel workbook, we'll be able to go to the sheet, right? So that's the overall sequence. So we'll say workbook, we create an instance of the workbook and we'll say workbook factory. So workbook factory dot create, right? So here you need to create, basically you need to have this provide the input stream, right? Because we have created the input stream and now we want to basically create this input stream to read this particular file and pass the file input stream, right? So, and just import this workbook from Apache POI. Now you will see that this library is, or workbook is coming from Apache POI user mode. Okay, make sure you are importing the correct one. Okay, now here, okay, so what this error is, so basically once we do that, there are unhandled exceptions. So either we have to surround this code in the try catch block, or we'll add the throws declaration to remove this error. Okay, so I'll say add throws declaration, and you will see file not found exception, and then for the same thing we'll add throws declaration IO exception. Okay, so these errors are gone, and now once we open the workbook, the next thing is we read data from sheet. So there is a sheet class as well, and we'll say sheet name, right? So we'll say sheet name, and we'll say from the workbook wb dot get sheet, right? So there is a get sheet, and you have this get sheet method wherein you can pass the sheet name or index, or there are a lot of other options available. So say for example, I want to get the sheet which is at index 0. I just use this index and provide the integer there. I am referring this sheet with the sheet name, and because we have defined this sheet name here, so we'll just select sheet name. Whatever we pass from here should get replaced here, and we should be able to read the data within that sheet. Okay, so hover over and import this sheet from this I think it is ss.user model. We'll just import that. Let me hover over. Yes, you can see that this is basically ss.user model. So all of that is basically from ss.user model. Okay, so once that's done, we are now able to reach to the sheet. Okay, the next step is to get the total rows and column dynamically, right? So within this sheet, I have currently 5 rows and 2 columns, but tomorrow I might be adding more columns, more rows. So there should be a functionality, or there should be logic in my utility. If there is more rows, it should be able to read the data based on the dynamic changes that happen in this sheet, right? So we need to put the logic. So first we need to count the rows and columns in the sheet and what data is there. So to do that, we'll simply use a variable, we'll use integer to store the rows and columns, right? And we'll say total rows. Okay, and total rows will get by sheet name dot, there is a method get last row number. Okay, so this method will return whatever number of rows are there, okay, in the sheet. Okay, wherever the data, for example here you will get the row number as 5, and then similarly for the column we'll write, right? So let me print that here as well, so that we know that what total number of rows are, and we'll populate that. So similarly here, what we need to do is we need to get the row, or basically the cell or the column count as well, right? So to get the column count, we need to get the cells that are there in the row. So we can say there is a class row, and we can say row cells to get the row cells that are there. And there is a, so we'll say, we will say sheet name dot get row, right? So we'll simply say sheet name and small s, right? So we'll say sheet name dot get cells, right? Or sorry, get row. So this will, if you hover over, right? So if I simply go to the description here, so it returns the logical row, which is 0 based, right? So it will get, or basically capture a row. And once you capture a row, then you can see how many cells are there within the row, right? So this will say for example, 0th row. Okay, and this will capture the logical row, and we need to import this. So import row from Apache POI, and then we will get to know by this row cells, we can say row cells. Okay, we'll say total columns, and total columns we'll get from row cells, and there is a method get last cell number, right? So this will give us the last cell number of this logical row that has been selected, and let's print that column as well. Now we have got within this sheet, with this logic, we have got the total number of rows and columns. So tomorrow, if I increase, say, number of rows here, it will automatically detect how many rows and columns are there. Okay, and we'll see that in action once we finish this. Okay, now the next thing is we need to format this data. So there is a data formatter class which will also understand, but for now let's understand the logic so that you will read the data, right? So as of now, I'll just type in data formatter, create an instance of the data formatter, and because we need to format the data that we are picking up from the sheet. So in the sheet there could be integer, there could be boolean, there could be string. So we need to format the data whatever we are picking up and store it as either as a string or object and then pass it, right? So that's why we need to have this data formatter to get whatever data we are getting, we format it and then display it, right? So data formatter is used for that purpose. So we'll simply say we'll create an instance of the data formatter class, and that's it, right? So as of now, and import this data formatter, hover over and import this from user module Apache POI. Okay, the next thing is we need to basically start reading, right? So we need to basically iterate through the sheet and start reading the data. So how we can do that? For that we simply need nested loops, right? So 2 for loops, and first loop will iterate through the rows and second loop will iterate through the column. Okay, so we know that first loop is, say for example, starts from 0. When we say 0, it is basically saying start from this row here, right? This we don't want, because we know first row is the header row in our test data sheet. So we'll start from the second one, which is basically the index will be 1 for that. So instead of 0, we'll say for I is equal to 1, and then I is less than or equal to total number of rows, right? So this sheet will have total rows, which we have already calculated. So total rows will be 5, right? So less than or equal to total rows, okay, which we have already got from here by this method. Then we want to increment, right? So we just say I plus plus. This will iterate through the rows. Then once we iterate through the rows, then we need to have another for loop to iterate through the cells or columns, right? So we'll say for int j is equal to 0, and j we want to start right from the 0th or the first column, because row anyways we have removed this, right? So we have removed this row. So when we say 0th index for column, it is basically this particular column, right? So this is the 0th index. So we'll say for j is equal to 0, and then j is less than total columns, right? We want to say j, okay, call, fine. Okay, so why we are doing this j is less than and not equal to? Because we know that total column count will be returned as, say for example, 2, right? And because we are starting from 0, so we just want to iterate one less than whatever total column count is, because we will start with 0th index, which will return me the first column, then first index will return me the second column, right? And total column will return me the 2. So if we iterate till the total column, it will iterate till the third column, right? Because we are starting with index 0. All right, now we will basically iterate and we'll get the data, right? So to get the data, we'll simply say we'll create a 2-dimensional array. So we'll say test data, and we want to store it into the 2-dimensional array, and we'll say I minus, sorry, within this index we'll say, because this is I minus 1, right? So we want to store this data into 2-dimensional array, and we want to say that index 0.0 contains the first value, right? So 0.0 contains this, and then 0.1 contains this, because for us this is the 0th row, right? So this is the first row, and 0.0 is basically this cell here. 0.1 is this, right? Then 1.0 is this cell here. 1.1 is this cell, right? So we'll simply say I minus 1, because we are starting from 1, so which makes it 0th index, and then the j, because j is starting at 0. So at 0th index, what we need to store is we want to basically first format whatever data we are picking up. So we'll say format, which is the reference of or the instance of the data formatter class. Then we want to format the cell value. So we'll say format cell value, right? And provide the cell, right? So what is the cell? So we'll say sheet name dot get, right? So we'll say sheet name dot get. There is some, move this a little bit up here, okay, dot get, right? Active cell, okay, sorry, not active cell, get row. So basically dot get row, and within this row we want to say get row, whatever first row it is, right? So pass the I there, and then get cell, right? So we'll say get cell and pass j there. Okay, so what this is doing is it is going to the sheet name, right? So whatever sheet is there, so say for example the login sheet, goes to that sheet and then gets the row whatever is passed here, right? So first row, so it gets the first row, this row, okay, and then the cell, so whatever cell, so if the cell says 0, which is basically the case here, so cell is 0 because j is 0 in the first iteration, so it gets that and formats the value. It gets that value at this location and formats and stores it in the test data. Right, now we have to create a variable test data, which we'll understand. Okay, and then we'll simply say let's print out. So we'll say sys out and we'll print this whatever data we are getting will on the screen. Okay, now we need to define this variable. So this is two-dimensional array, so we can simply say either we can say object, because we know that this will be the the data that is returned from the Excel sheet will be stored will be formatted and stored as a string. So if you hover over this format cell, you will see that it will return the value as string, right? So we'll create a variable of type strings and we'll say test data and two-dimensional and create that particular, we'll create a class of this total rows and column. All right, okay, so what we are doing here is we are just saying this is the variable, okay, which holds a two-dimensional array, right? So it holds the two-dimensional array and whatever values that we are getting here will be stored in this test data. Okay, so we have defined it here so that we can basically store the values here and display them. Okay, now once we are done with all of this, we simply need to return this data, right? So we need to return so that other method, because we'll be needing this data to be used into other methods, right? Or when we actually read this data and use it into our test case. So we return this, we'll say return test data, right? So that's pretty much what is required to basically implement this particular utility. Okay, let me delete everything here. Why is this error? Let me see. Change the method return type to string, right? So as soon as I'll return this test data, you'll see the method return type I have mentioned here is void, right? That means no return type. So as soon as I'll return something, I have to change it to the type that I'm returning. So what type I'm returning? I'm returning the two-dimensional string, right? Or basically the array, so which stores the strings that I'm getting from the Excel sheet. So as soon as I'll change, that error will be gone. Now let's quickly test this util and see whether it's working fine. So how we can test it? So in the main method, we simply need to create an instance of this get data, right? So we can simply say create an object of this class. Okay, so we'll say read Excel data and I'll say read Excel data and we'll create an instance there, and we need to pass the sheet, right? So we'll simply create an object, create an instance, and then we simply need to call the method, right? So we'll say red dot get data and pass this sheet name, right? So what is the sheet name? The sheet name from where we need to read the data is login, right? Lowercase login. So let me save this and close it, and we will pass the sheet name here, right? So we'll simply say login and colon there. Okay, so add the throws declaration. So you'll see that we need to add throws declaration or surround it with try catch. So we'll add throws declaration there and the error will be gone. Okay, so there are no errors now. Let's run it and see that the data is being returned. So file not found. Okay, test resources, test data dot xlsx. Okay, dot xlsx. So src test resources and then this test data and test data. Okay, looks okay. We check where the issue is. All right, okay, here you will see that it is test automation framework and basically the backslash, right? So there is something here which is basically all right here. Okay, we are missing these two backslashes there. So this is something you can work out as you go along, and it's highly recommended you troubleshoot. So let's run again, see if it's fine. Right, okay, so you'll see it has returned all the data there. So 4 is the row, 2 is the column, right? And all the data that is there in the sheet has been returned. Okay, now tomorrow if I update this Excel sheet, okay, let me open and add few more rows there. Okay, so say for example I added few more rows and then let's say I added another column there and saved this data, and the same utility should work and should be able to read this data for us, and we should be able to use this data into our test cases. You can see here that now there are 9 rows, 3 columns, and everything has been returned on the. So this is the basic utility that you need for reading the data, test data from the Excel file and use it into your test cases. So we are done with the utility. Okay. Now the next step is how we are going to use this utility in our test cases to read the data and populate the username and password from the Excel sheet and run this test. So that's all for this tutorial. I hope this was helpful. In the next one, I will implement reading of the data and populating it into the test cases and running the test. So that's all. Thank you very much for watching.